part of my presentation is going to be totally philosophical. And I'm going to take like a 10,000 foot view of really like the economy and marketing over the last, 60 years. And I'm going to try and frame a lot of what we've heard today in terms of content marketing in this larger sort of shift that's happened. It's, and hopefully going to help you guys understand why you would want a content-driven site. And now there's been a lot of conversations today about content, so in a way, some of the work's already been done, but what I'm hoping to do is take us even farther out and really understand some of the reasons behind why is it that people are attracted to content? Why is it that personalization is something that we should be thinking about? Not just because it works, not just because there says 66% of people who come in through pull marketing are likely to convert, but why is that the case? And why is that true now and was not necessarily true before? So I stumbled upon this great article, long-form essay by the Deloitte Center for the Edge. Deloitte Center for the Edge is based out of the Bay Area. It is connected to Deloitte University in Texas. And they published this long study, 20,000 companies were analyzed, and their performance over the last 60 years, 70 years. And what they were trying to do is provide a framework for executives to make decisions for their companies and to try and understand what's been going on. So the first part of it's pretty straightforward, and most of us, I think, are aware of this, that there was this huge technological uptick. And they were really specific about it, of course. Computing power, storage, and bandwidth all grew exponentially. And it looked sort of like this. One of the things that they realized or they noticed was that along with that huge uptick in technological development was also a very fast adoption rate among individuals. And this is really important because what they also found was there was a high correlation, of course, with new technology companies developing solutions, opportunities, businesses, infrastructure businesses, Cisco's, Apple's, all these different companies were coming up. But what was not happening was there was not a high adoption rate among established companies and non-technological companies. One of the interesting things that ended up happening was that as individuals, and of course you guys have all had these experiences, so this isn't some sort of like foreign idea here. For any of you who had Walkmans or CD-mans and then use an iPod, you know how profound the experience of using technology was, right? Because all of a sudden, like in this example, you were able to carry your entire music library with you, right? Before it was 80 minutes. Now it's your whole music library. And you didn't need necessarily a mixtape or a mixed CD. You could make a playlist. You could make it on the train. And so all of a sudden, your experience of media and your experience even just of life started to change. And we started to see this also online as websites developed out. And this is obviously one of the best examples of a different kind of consumer experience, which was Amazon. All of a sudden, you have access to this crazy array of products. And in addition to the products, you also have access to ratings and reviews from people, from individuals. Anyone here remember, they still exist, but anyone here remember using Consumer Reports as your primary source of information on whether or not to buy like a dishwasher? Okay, so if you have used Consumer Reports, do you still use it? And if you still use it, do you only use it still? Probably not. You're probably using all these other forms of evaluating all these different options that you have. So the consumer experience fundamentally changed, right? Huge access to products. You could assess quality, not just extensively, not just in comparison, but also the quality of that review, right? It was a person. It wasn't a reviewer or a company that was telling you something. You had personalized experiences, and then you could customize your own experience. So Deloitte, what they pulled from that was, they sort of put it in a slightly larger context. They also said, in addition to these technological changes, there was what they called the liberalization of driving economic and public policies. I call deregulation. And those combined with these technological developments created this huge shift in power from companies to individuals. And so if you think of like there being like a buyer's or a seller's market for housing, the same is true for consumers. We, as individuals, are much more empowered to evaluate companies, evaluate their products, to make choices, and we are much more in the driver's seat than we ever used to be. Something else has also changed. If any of you have ever read, there's a great book called The Paradox of Choice, and it highlights a lot of the sort of cultural and social changes that have happened. And these are some that I thought were really interesting. Increasingly, people are skeptical of marketing. There is a much higher level of brand disloyalty. People have shifted to a more values-oriented mindset when evaluating companies and whether or not to buy things. And also, when you look at luxury brands, an interesting thing happens. And this is particularly interesting to me because I'm dealing with ballet, and ballet has all these connotations to it, about being sort of a luxury experience or, particularly high-end, and there's other words that are not so complimentary that some people have associations with, and I need to understand that. And so I've been looking at some of these trends. For example, Tesla, they changed their logo, and they made the name smaller, and they used a symbol, and the same thing is happening at Tiffany, and the same thing is happening at Patron. They have less gilding on their bottles. What they see is these small things they can do to reduce conspicuous consumption and making it inconspicuous consumption. And that's something that's happening broadly. This has just happened recently. REI said, we're not going to be open on Black Friday. And we're going to tell you about it, and we're going to give all our employees a day off, and we're still going to pay them. Because we believe that this has gotten totally out of hand. That's values. They're saying that's what we stand for. And when you shop with us, you can wear that. That's you. Now you associate. You are an REI person. You're an REI buyer. Huh? What does that mean? That's what's happening. De La Soul. Now there's Zach Braff is another good example of people who have raised money on Kickstarter and other platforms. Now what I thought was interesting about this was De La Soul, right, very well known. They certainly could get a contract with a record executive. The reason they said they wanted to raise money through Kickstarter was because they wanted to free themselves of the constraints of a record company. And they wanted to be able to produce the album that they, felt was the truest artistic expression of themselves. Hugely successful, in part, I think, because they were expressing a value. And so when you supported them, you weren't just supporting the album or the music, which you don't know what it's going to be. You were supporting the idea that they stood for. La Placa Cohen, every 2 years, publishes something called Culture Track. It's great. If you don't read it or look at it, you totally should. They basically just look across cultural organizations and they report against it. They described, in a slightly different way, how this trend has shifted. People have become overstimulated, hyperconnected, overcommitted, promiscuous, cynical, self-focused. These guys. I do have a man bun and a beard, so it's a certain irony in me sharing this, but suffice it to say the end result has been, and I should say this is an aggregated report, right? So this is a generalization, and you're going to find different percentages of this with your own audiences. But I do think that generally speaking, what we've seen is pretty consistent, and I'd be willing to bet that most of you in this room could identify with this. And this is not within the arts community. This is across all these companies, across all these industries in the US. They spend more to acquire customers, there's a higher churn rate, and they spend more to keep the people who they do have. So anyone here have one of these issues at your arts organizations, where you have a high churn rate, where you spend a lot to keep people? It's okay, don't be embarrassed. This is from the Culture Track. In the visual arts, in 2011, membership at museums and places like that went down from 26% in 2011 to 15% in 2014. At performing arts organizations, it went from 23% down to 10% of their total audience being subscribers. So I'm talking about this broadly, but this we can see it manifested directly in our field. So first takeaway, the market and the consumer has fundamentally changed. Fundamental. 2, the consumers have more power. Their expectations are higher, and as a consequence, the cost to acquire and retain them has also gone up. And 3, Audiences are looking for ways to filter out the noise. They're looking for meaningful connections and things that add value to their life and ways to escape the stress of an over-connected society. One of the statistics I found really interesting is if you look at baby boomers and the reasons why they subscribe or they go to the arts, when they asked, 43% of them said to escape sort of stress. If you ask millennials, it's 70%. Right? So that's the world we're in right now. So what have people been doing in response to this across all these institutions? Well, sadly, not much. This is looking from 1965 to 2012, and it's a look at return on assets. And what this was part of the Deloitte study, and what they found was over these 20,000 companies in aggregate, when you look at their assets, the things they own, the things that you could sell for value or you can leverage for value, that the revenue that they got in relation to their assets, how much could they make off of their assets, dropped 75% over that time period. Right? So here's another way of looking at it. If you had $100,000 in assets in 1965, you could hope to make $4,100 in profit. In 2012, $910. Their conclusion was that despite improvements in overall worker productivity, essentially these companies were not taking advantage of technology. They weren't able to leverage technology and also leverage the cultural changes and respond to them. And why was that? Well, they think it's because for a really long time we've really been an industrial-based society. And in the simplest possible way, I think I can explain it. In the 19th century, if you made shoes, somebody came to you to buy your shoe. Once we had the Industrial Revolution, I could take that one guy who knew how to make a shoe, and then I could reproduce it on scale. And so I controlled the means of production, and so now that's actually the way I make money. That's now changed. But during the period where that was true, what everyone worked towards was efficiency. How could I reduce the cost of making something so I could scale it up more and make more off of each thing? So if I was making shoes, I want to make more shoes for less. And it created this really wonderfully stable environment. And people got used to that idea of looking for ways to be stable. And what they basically said was that what's happened is in response to all these changes, what we've essentially been doing is just trying to whittle away at what we do have and make as much as we can. And we're guilty of that in the arts as well. It's not that we shouldn't do that, but we spend a lot of time on things like different types of subscription packages, dynamic pricing. We have fleets of interns. These are all ways of reducing cost so that we can make as much of a profit margin as possible. And the problem is that we're still doing that, even though fundamentally the market has changed. And that is not going to work anymore. So what do we do? Well, one option is to try and leverage those assets we have, and those can be intellectual assets, it can be recordings, it can be performances, you name it. What can we do to leverage them? So this is where we get to the first sort of type of content-driven site. See, I brought it all the way back. So the first kind of content-driven site. So this is Paris Opera Ballet, and they're doing some really fantastic stuff out there. On their website, in the top right-hand corner, if you clicked on that button, it would take you to something they call Third Stage. And Third Stage is a place where you can experience ballet. So this is the site it takes you to, and if you scroll down, you can click and you can watch this movie, and it's a ballet movie. But here's the thing. They didn't document a ballet. They actually made a ballet film. It's ballet for film for that medium, and then they shared it on here. And then if you keep going on, there's all these different categories from graphic, photographic, and film. What they've essentially doing is they're exploring ballet through different mediums that are not necessarily the live experience. And so they're leveraging their artists and they're leveraging other artists to create a new experience. Now, this is not revenue generating, but it is leveraging their assets in a new way to try and connect with people. In that way, it's very similar to news, right? This is and what is distinct about these types of sites, what I think defines them, is that instead of providing you with content to try and drive you to go see a show, the content is the thing. It is the thing you're selling. It is the service. And so in that way, it's a lot like a newspaper. So another example, San Francisco Symphony created this with PBS. It's called Keeping Score, and the entire site is basically an educational site around music. Again, not revenue generating, but you get the idea. The type of site is the service. You go to the site for the content, and that's what you get out of it. This is Chicago Symphony Orchestra, or CSO. They are actually leveraging their assets to make money. So they're taking their recordings and they're making them available through their site. And then it extends out from there. They're also taking advantage of other distribution methods like iTunes and putting their music up there. So these are examples of taking your assets, leveraging them in a new way to try and generate revenue, or at least generate interest around the art form or around your brand. All right, well, let's talk about these guys, because I do know that for most of us, that is not a reality. Creating a separate site or a separate part of your site to produce, like content. I know for a lot of you, that's not really a possibility. So let's talk about how we address these guys and how we use content to drive these new interests, these new point of view, this new value-oriented way towards the work you do and the ways in which you do generate revenue. So let's look at some of the challenges. So as I was saying before, for a lot of people, they can see through marketing, right? We know. Look, all of us in here know. We know when we're being sold to. We know better than anyone when someone's trying to manipulate us or trying to get us through a sales funnel, right? And it turns out that a lot of consumers are aware of it. They've been through it for a long time, and this isn't necessarily technology, but that has amplified people's awareness around it. Wanting quality over cachet, what you want when you want it, lots of options, enjoy flexibility, are commitment phobic, right? Hence plummets in subscriptions and memberships, and they want to co-author their experience, right? They want to be part of what it is that they're doing. So let's look at some possible solutions. So seeing through marketing, so increasing invitations to connect, right? Want quality over cachet, connect to the craft, play down your personal achievements and why you're so great, prove your value. The great thing is we're artists. We create great stuff that has intrinsic value. If we just can share that, people will buy into it. For what they want when they want it, multiple points of entry into the art form. In other words, here's an anecdote. I talked to a mother who has some young kids, and I was wondering why it was she came to Nutcracker, but she never came to any of our other shows. So I asked her. I was like, is it the programming? What is it? Because we don't do like family shows necessarily in repertory. She said, no, your shows are just too late in the day and they're too long. She said, but sometimes me and my kids, we just go onto your website and we just watch your videos when we want to see some ballet. Right? So it's like, sometimes it's not it's about meeting the customer where they are and understanding that it's not always going to be in your venue where that you're going to connect with them. There's lots of options out there, and this is one of the best, right? We create unique, intangible, and intrinsically interesting and impactful experiences. We have that over a lot of other people. Commitment phobic, that's fine. Let's make sure we're approachable, and let's make sure there's multiple types and levels of commitment. If we only have sort of like you're new to us, you buy a ticket or you subscribe, can we find some room in there, for the people who aren't quite ready for that? And then they want to co-author their experience. Great. Make room for their voices online. Make sure that anytime you're thinking about creating something on a website or anywhere else, that you're making room for them as well. And the same thing, artists think the same way. They have to make room for their audience in the production, and we have to make room for them online. So when you look at those solutions, you can see how content, and we've talked about it all day, right? How content can help in these connections, in proving value, in creating relationships. And when we look, there's some great examples of sites that do that, that use content to make the case. The Worcester Group, I think, actually is one of the best. And what they did, they have this section on their site, it's called Dailies. And what they did was they hired a videographer, and he's there all the time, and he's just always around. He's always documenting stuff. And not quite every day, but pretty often, at the end of the day, he's shot some stuff, he's edited something really quick. These are like 10 to 30 seconds long. And he actually sits down with all the people who were there that day. He shows it to them they give him any feedback or do approvals all that day, and then he posts it at the end of the day. And they're just doing this all the time, which means he's catching all sorts of stuff. He's catching stuff in the back room, things in rehearsals, backstage, behind stage. And so it ends up being these really great videos because sometimes they're sort of, you're connecting with the company because you're seeing that kind of behind the stage stuff. Sometimes you're connecting with the show they're working on. So sometimes it's promotion of the company, sometimes it's promotion of the productions. And so it's a great way to drive people's interest. And it's this ongoing series. So if people get interested in the series, they're going to get interested in the company, they're going to get interested in the work. And that's a way, this is the second type of website. It's one of content-driven websites. It's ones where the content really drives you to these productions and supports your services. This is another one I love, the Dutch National Ballet. One of the things I love about this site is they actually kind of took a page out of startups. I'm sure all of you have been to 100 startup websites, like marketing startup websites, right? And they all start the same way. Their name, their tagline, and like a paragraph about what they do, right? They immediately want you to know what they do. And the Dutch National Ballet took a page out of there and said, we're not going to assume that because you came to this site, you know much about us. And so they put a short description of sort of who they are and what they stand for at the top. Below that is their productions, and then under that, behind the scenes. And as you continue to scroll down, we have artists and musical staff, company and dancers, and then as you keep going, news. So when you think about that page, right, most of it is about the company and is about who they are, what they stand for, and that's how they're creating this relationship and connection that's driving people to interest in the brand and then interest in the productions that they're doing. So this is option 2, right? It's a website that uses content to drive traffic. I just want to throw this out there. This is more like a thought experiment. I don't necessarily know that I believe it, but I just wanted to throw it out there because I think it's an interesting idea. I was reading Anne Bogart, who's is the head of the directing program at Columbia, and she runs City Company, and she's one of the most prolific writers on sort of art making. And she was saying, because she has this very small company, fundraising is action. She's a way of meeting people, building community, and articulating ideas, concepts, and intentions. And when I read this, what I thought was, God, what would the marketing equivalent be of that? And I was thinking about all the stuff I'm talking about with content, and sometimes it feels very tactical, right? And almost, like, it's almost potentially missing the point, which is, what if we thought of ourselves instead as like community organizers? I mean, we are a service organizations, right? And I know we have bottom lines. I'm not saying we don't. I just thought for a moment, what if we just sort of flipped it and we started from that place and let the marketing come out of there? And then these ideas of creating stories and talking about who you are and what you stand for, does it just make it a little bit more organic if you're thinking from that perspective? Just an idea, just a thought. So this is that fourth takeaway, just in summation. Okay, this all sounds great. A. B. Why the big runaround on the history? Could have just done that takeaway to start with. Well, here's a real big reason. Hopefully you got something out of that sort of broad contextualization. But the other thing I think is really important is to understand all this context can help to get buy-in. Whether you're going to an executive director, a marketing director, or you're just talking to your team, or if you got a small enough company, you're just sitting down, you're just talking about this. You're just saying things have changed. And I think this is really important. I mean, if you're a small company and you're looking to larger companies as models, maybe you shouldn't. We're trying to figure this out. In fact, what I hope you got out of that whole section before is that everyone is trying to figure this out, not just in theater, not just in arts, but across every industry. They are trying to answer these questions. So it helps with building that buy-in. And I just want to talk really briefly because I think Tom spoke a lot about this. I think there's been a lot of conversation about buy-in, but I just want to, this is my sort of like, you can do it moment, okay? So the first one is, if you're a small company, you've got some really great advantages over larger companies. You probably have less complicated contractual agreements with your artists. You literally have less people. Your ability to be agile is going to be much higher, and in this day and age, that's really important. Randy Weiner, he's a producer and writer, and Randy, he produced Sleep No More here. I actually worked with him on the Donkey Show over on 23rd and 11th, whatever direction that is. Thank you. And then he also did Queen of the Night, and he has his Club the Box here, all the things that he produced. And he was recently profiled in Forbes. And they asked him, because he's really, nimble. He's doing all these different things, and like people will come to him. Somebody came to him for working on one of his shows, and they're like, "Man, your show's great. I think you guys should do like event stuff." And he was like, "Great, I'll hire you. You're going to build out the event part of my business. Go for it." And so he was recently profiled in Forbes, and they asked him. They said, "So it seems like you're really entrepreneurial." And he said, "No, I'm not entrepreneurial. I'm opportunistic." And I think that's something really important to understand, and especially if you're a small company, your ability to be flexible and opportunistic is actually really high, and you should capitalize on that. For larger organizations, Tom was talking about executive buy-in, which can be really, really hard. And hopefully I've given you some tools to help you with that. But I wanted to just point this out. This is From Good to Great. It's a fantastic book. And what I love about it is working in a nonprofit, the whole conversation in there is about what makes companies great. And Jim Collins, he's like, often you hear it's like nonprofits versus for-profits. Nonprofits should borrow from for-profits. And I hate that. And, he was saying, look, it's not about nonprofit versus for-profit. There's plenty of terrible for-profit companies. He said it's about being good or being great. And one of the things he said about being great was, if you can't get executive buy-in, then figure out what your sphere of influence is and make it perfect. Take that little piece and do great work right there. And then you can find ways to advocate for your work from there. But don't let the fact that you don't have executive buy-in stop you. That's my rah-rah speech. And the reason why I say it is because when it comes to stuff, I'm going to take you through our process for creating our new site. And it's there's a lot to it, and you may not be able to do all of it, and that's fine. And what I'm saying is, if there's just one little piece you can take out of it, you should, and just try it, and do that, and see if you can make a little pocket of perfection in your sphere of influence. All right. So you got some buy-in, or you got your little perfection sphere. So what do you do next? Well, for us, we work with this company, Method, that's based out of San Francisco. And Method does as much work around user experience and design and web development as they do around brands. And one of the really important things, and I found this true, in this project, and before I worked at San Francisco Ballet, I worked at Steppenwolf, and before that I was here working with some production companies here. And every time the same thing was true, is you got to get your ducks in a row. And what that means is you got to know who you are, articulate your brand values and your mission, what your business goals are, and your audience research, right? Because if you think about that, right, you've got business goals, this is what we want. Audience research, this is what our audience wants. And then brand and vision, that's the lens through which you're both communicating. That's what's facilitating it. So if you can get those three things articulated, and it doesn't have to be perfect, and I'll steal another one from Ann Bogart, who said, what's true today does not need to be true tomorrow, right? There's so many great lessons we can learn from the art-making process. This is what she says to her actors. What's true today does not need to be true tomorrow. What it means is make a choice, put a stake in the ground, and start to work. And so with this, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know exactly what your brand values are, but put something down. Put your mission down. Put your business goals down, go talk to some audience, and allow yourself to, as you're working through the project, to refine these. This is going to be the basis for the rest of your work, okay? The next piece is going to be, what's your overall strategy based on those three pieces of information? From there, you're going to articulate the experience you want people to have when they come to your website. From there, it's going to help inform things like how you actually structure your site, and then at that point, that's when you start talking about color, composition, logos. Not till then. You got to do all that work first. At least give it a try. Okay, so this is our mission. Share our joy of dance with the widest possible audience, and we also have a school, so provide the highest caliber of dance training. Our brand values: innovation, excellence, exuberance, diversity, vitality. These were our goals, our business goals. We wanted to increase revenue, no shocker there. We wanted to increase interest among younger audiences. Again, not a big surprise. At the ballet, that means under 45. And we wanted to decrease churn. So we had a lot of people coming in and then leaving. So these are a bedrock that we started with. Our audience research. So there was a lot of different audience research, and Eric alluded to this. This was probably the single most important informative piece of information. There was other stuff we learned and applied, but this is one I really wanted to point at. Was this idea that a patron's knowledge level is a key indicator to their taste diversity, so range of interest in the art form, how frequently they attend, and also their loyalty to us. And actually, not such a crazy idea, you say it out loud. I mean, we saw this and we were like, oh, this makes so much sense. And, but when you say it out loud, you're like, yeah, duh. But, look at things, and this is where it starts to get really interesting, is you start looking at other examples. And I started thinking about things like coffee and wine and all these different things that as you learn more about them and you start to appreciate them, and then you get to this point where you're like, I'm a wine drinker. I'm a coffee drinker. I know stuff about cheese, You know what I mean? That's what we're talking about. That's what we need to do with ballet, right? Is we were like, oh, right. We need to help people a little bit. It's a highly structured art form with a long history, and they don't need to know they shouldn't feel like they need to know a lot going in. But man, if we could help them along the way, imagine where we could end up. So from that, we articulated sort of I thought was a really, really smart articulation by Mary Beth, who's my boss, is sitting right over there. This was like I had just started working at San Francisco Ballet, and I saw this, and this was one of those like, I am in the right place, man. I'm so lucky. And it was because what she did was she connected knowledge to appreciation, right, and impact and stronger loyalty, and then she connected that up to mission, and then she drove that up to revenue. So she very neatly knit together all these different pieces from artistic directors' interests to executive directors' interests all the way through. What a powerful idea to be able, because now that is actionable in a really profound way. So we took that and then we started, and so now we're talking to design companies, and we've got to synthesize that so that they understand what we're trying to do. And so this is in broad strokes, because sure, we could say we want more revenue, and we did. We told them that, but how were we going to do that? How did we think we were going to do that? So the first part was we wanted to just make our site more user-friendly and user-centered. It's an obvious one. We wanted to invoke the spirit of the company and the art form, for that matter. Now, the internet, over the last 10 years, the expressive potential has really gone through the roof, right? I mean, Flash was the early iteration. Now we have, these parallax sites, right? And as you scroll and things are happening. And so the emotional experience we can create online has really jumped. And that's really good for the arts, because it means we can communicate our experience better. And so that's something we really want to do. We wanted to feel like when you come to the site, look, our art form is experiential, it's visceral, it's emotional. And so when you come to the site, you should have that. You should feel some of that. If it's over-intellectualized or it's too utilitarian, you miss the whole point. It's an art form. This is going to be a different experience. And I love Virgin, but the flight experience is not quite as exciting as going to theater or opera or ballet, right? Wow. And then the third part, and this was based on our audience research, was create an educational gateway. So create a pedagogical course for someone to go from newbie to, PhD. So now we had articulated our strategy. The next piece was to articulate the customer experience, what we wanted it to feel like to be on there. And we developed experience drivers. So just to give a very quick, idea of what an experience driver is, it's basically, here's a Mercedes, here's a Mini, right? Both cars, you drive them both. But consider the experience, right? If I'm sitting in this, I'm feeling supported. It's a luxury experience, right? I'm feeling sort of, it's very refined. It's very, I just feel sort of like lifted up. In a Mini, the experience is different, right? It's a sportier, you're lower to the ground. And so just consider the experience before you even think about the design. What does it feel like? What do we want people to feel? So that's what we're trying to do, is articulate the experiences, the core experiences we wanted people to have on our site. So these are our experience drivers. These aren't all of them, but these are, so the biggest ones for us. The first was that we wanted our content to be easily discoverable, but we wanted it not to get in the way of what you were trying to accomplish, if you had a specific task in mind. The second one was to build knowledge, and I'll talk more about this, but this is basically to create this loop of knowledge and experience. The third one is we wanted to tell stories, and this goes to a lot of what's been talked about today, and we wanted to put what we were trying to sell to people in the context of a larger narrative. The fourth is we felt like the purchase path was an opportunity that we weren't taking advantage of, because we were thinking of the purchase as the end goal. And actually, for the user, it's the beginning of this fantastic adventure they're going to go on. And so how could we think about the purchase path in that way, instead of as being the landing, but that's actually the takeoff, and the ticket is your gateway to that artistic experience? What would that mean for the purchase path? And the last is we're a dance company, and specifically a ballet company. And so while we want content on there, we want it to feel curated and choreographed, just like when you come to see our experience. So I'm just going to talk briefly about some of these, just in a little more detail. So this is this idea of, if you've got something to do on our site, we want to make sure you can do it and not get in your way. So if you want to purchase tickets, it's easy. However, if you're on the production page and something catches your eye, like music, and then from there you find out about a ballet conductor and what it is, great. We want you to be able to do that as well. So this is like a T-shaped model of engagement. The next was, as I was saying, as we progress someone from early in their customer life cycle, from newbie, and we want to get them to loyal patron, we want to try and do that. We understand that key to that is this education piece. So this is you, and this is you going to have an experience, and it's your first time. You have that experience, and now we want you to learn something. And if you learn something, then that's going to progress you to that next stage, right? And you just keep doing that, and as you go round and round, you go up this cycle. And then this is the beautiful part, is if it all works out, then you get a exit velocity, and you get a supporter. So that's the sort of core idea that we were working with here. Okay. So these are all really broad concepts that we were dealing with. So now we need to start grounding it. How do we actually take these conceptual models and start to make a website? So the key to this, we found, was with user journeys. And user journeys are basically, oh, that doesn't look right. Oh, that's too bad. All right, well, here, I'll jump ahead. So that didn't look good, did it? So a user journey basically is looking at a person, if a customer life cycle is sort of like, what's their entire journey with us as an organization? A customer journey, that's a life cycle. The journey is just, we're looking at it in the context of the website. So what are the stages that you go through? And this is really the purchase funnel, right? And under each column of the purchase funnel, so in this case, discover, and then you discover us, you discover a program, then you explore a program, then you attend the program, and then eventually, hopefully, you support us in some way through volunteering otherwise. And so what we're doing is, for each stage, we're saying, what are all the different touch points? What are all the different versions of this? So what are all the different ways you could discover us? Or what are all the different ways you might try and explore? So you find out about a show, and you want to know more about it. What are all the different ways in which you might do that? And so on and so forth. And what you get out of that, once you take that, you can then map it. And so this is an example of the map that we put together. And the key here is that you do one of these for each of your different types of users or types of patrons. So this is one for newbies, and you see this is, it's a long path, and it's just tracking through, and we'll go to the very beginning here. It's tracking through all the different stages of connections with us. So here's the first stage, and you can see there's, we've got social media outlets or email or TV commercials, right? These are all the different ways in which a person might find out about a show. And then we've got, once they've found out, how might they explore? And then we're actually going into a little more detail here. We're trying to sort of get into their heads a little bit and figure out, okay, what are you looking for when you're at this point? What's your frame of mind? What are you thinking about? So in this case, what do they want to find out? Well, they want to find out maybe about stories or reviews, or they want to watch a trailer. And then you can actually see up there, I want to find information regarding performances to be easy to find and engaging. So this is something about the experience. So we're really trying to map out the user's point of view here on this whole experience. And then the next piece of that would be, what are the opportunities along this path to put content in? So that's where we start to map our content against their journey. So for example, we might see, oh, there's, and a lot of people do pre-show emails, and it's like, okay, well so before they go see a show, they get an email from us. This would be a great place to include something. And, oh, okay, they're on the production page. What kind of content are we sharing? Oh, it looks like they might be interested in something else. Okay, let's think about putting something there, right? So it's a really nice way to just sort of orient yourself. So now we've got this nice map. How do we actually translate this to pages? And keep in mind, like, all these things you can do, like, you don't need, you could right now, you could just map your site, right? So this is something else you can do I think is really helpful. So if you think about a website and you think about a web page, I break it down. You can break it down different ways, but I think of it as being made up of different types of content, and these are sort of the different types, okay? So then if I look at, this is our current site. If I look at our current site, if I look at our home page, right, there's an example of a branded piece of content, product-oriented stuff. There's a social call-out. Those are utility, right? They're just for finding navigation. And this is interesting. No editorial. So very quickly, you can start to see how you are prioritizing information, right? Here's the Worcester Group, brand, product, editorial, huge, right? Social, utility. Let's look at the Dutch National. This is really interesting. That's how they break down on that page, right? Fascinating. And you can do this right now. Any page on your site, you could take a look. Based on our analysis, we started looking at different types of pages on our site. If you think about templates on your site, this is actually a good way to think about it if you're building out different templates. So we were starting to see, like, well, we seem to have these 4 different types of pages. We have marketing pages, we have like story-driven pages, we've got utility pages, and we've got these aggregate pages, which are like landing pages, like home pages. And what we were looking at is what is the breakdown of content, and then what do we want it to be? So this was aspirational. This is how we wanted those pages to sort of represent these different types of content. So now I can take my user map and I can say, oh, here are the different stages people are going through. And I can take my page templates and I can say, oh, I've got some space here, I've got some space here. And I can start to plan against that stuff. And you can also do it for full sections of your site. And just see, how does my section rate up? And if here, this is our old navigation. And then we just went and we looked at all the pages and how does the content match up? This is a great way to just sort of very quickly assess your own sort of content representation and to also think about where you might want to go. The next piece of the puzzle. So now I'm talking about all this stuff, but what am I going to actually put there? So this is something we did. We wanted to do an audit of the content that we produce. So the first thing we did is we sort of listed out all our departments, and it doesn't have to be departments. You could list this out in different ways. We chose departments because that's really when we're trying to organize our minds around content. That's how we think about it. And then we went across the months, and we sort of said, what's happening at these different points? And just for anyone who's actually keeping track, this is not accurate. We're not actually doing, oh, actually, that's true. This one's not accurate. So anyway, but it gives you an idea, right? And we did it for the full year. What are we basically doing? And some interesting things started to happen. And if you're in a large organization, you're just trying to wrap your head around all this stuff, it's really helpful. But also if you're a small organization, you're just trying to figure out what should I talk about, throughout the year. And so we started noticing an interesting, periods in our season. So we had our repertory, Nutcracker, and off-season. And then we started talking about, well, what do we do in our off-season? And we started to notice things like, well, there's a lot of things going on at the school. And, oh, we've been talking about this whole education thing. Oh, maybe this is the time of the year when we really focus on the art form and educating people around it. Sounds great. And so we started developing this idea of sort of that the site would have to morph because at different times of year we had a different point of focus. So during Nutcracker we were kind of like, a big Hollywood blockbuster, but during Repertory we were sort of more like the New Yorker, and we had sort of like broader sort of articles, and because we've got 8 different shows, and each show could have up to 4 pieces in it. And then in the off season we were more like TED Talks. So it helped us by looking at the whole year and starting to look for patterns to start to articulate sort of shifting ideas that were happening. And you can do this for pages too. Look at what are the different things that you produce. and look at them in terms of content. So we do story ballets, we do new work, we do a gala, and start to chart out what are all the different pieces of content that might be involved. And it's really helpful because then you've got this list of content and you can start thinking about that page and what you want the experience to be, because I now know, well, I've got this strategy and I've got my content and I got this idea of what kind of proportion of stuff I want, and now it's just a question of plugging things in. It's not this sort of amorphous thing that you're not really sure how to approach. So it's a really helpful way to break things down. All right, this is the really exciting part. This is where I actually show you what we did. So other than Mary Beth and I don't think there's anyone else in this room that's seen this. So this is pretty awesome. So this is our new homepage. This is the very top of it. As you can see, we're going for a big emotional moment here. As you scroll down, it's another program that we have, and then you've got our calendar, just upcoming events, and then some call-outs for things that are coming up. And really, you shouldn't be thinking about this too specifically. We think about this more as like structured space. And we could put whatever we want in there. The other thing, just notice there are angles in some of those places to create a feeling of movement. Now, this isn't a prototype, so I can't show you. There's also other movement happening. It's all part of this sort of choreographed experience. And this is just examples of other types of content that could be down there. And then we have the footer at the bottom. So we've really reduced the amount of information. We've really focused on providing lots of different points of contact, but not overwhelming people. It should feel choreographed, remember? So let's look at this in like the big picture. This page is made up of what we refer to as modules. And what that means is we can, because we've got this shifting, we go from Nutcracker to repertory to TED Talk time, we need our site to be flexible. And so we built out all these different modules, and we can basically plug and play. And so depending on what time of year, we can really totally change the shape of the homepage. And we can do the same thing actually on any of our pages. So we've moved away from like just a single template or 5 template idea to actually it's one open framework with things you can just plug in and rework as you need to, which allows for a lot of flexibility and long-term growth. So this is our Explore Ballet section. So this really gets at the core of this educational idea that we're playing with. So Explore Ballet, it's the place where you can explore ballet, explore the art form. And it's essentially, in many ways, a blog. And it's got a feature, and then it's got upcoming educational events that are coming up. And then you've got the posts down here. And you can filter. If you click here, you can filter to see what you want. And then we'll go take a look at an actual post. Right, here's a post on Balanchine. And as you scroll down, nice big beautiful pictures, maybe a pull quote, and then some other recommended articles, because we want to keep people reading and learning about the art form. So what's so beautiful about this is, as I think it's Megan at HubSpot was saying, it's really important to have a way to drive to this content. Well, we want to make sure, in that T shape, right, we want to make sure you can dive into stuff. And the reverse is true, too. We want you to be able to find it. And so we've really put the Explore Ballet section at the center of the web experience. And what it means is that everywhere on the site, there's somewhere to connect to that Explore the art form. And we're trying to be really thoughtful about where that is. But we really want to feed people into it and out of it. We want that to just be part of your experience when you come to our site, are these opportunities to learn. This is a production page. Down below, there's a little date picker. And then the top is just an example of how sort of some flexibility we've built in, because we have shorter titles, we have longer titles, we have pieces that have multiple pieces in it. And then as you scroll, you see that buy tickets bar there. As you scroll, it becomes part of the navigation. Again, this is part of that T-shaped model, which is at any point we want you to be able to buy tickets, but we also want you to be able to explore other stuff. So here you can scroll down and find pull quotes, find stuff about casting. Here's a little bit of that interactive piece. And watch videos, and there's profile people, and history, and music. Now, we're not going to put all that content on every page. That would be madness. What we're going to do, though, is depending on what show it is, we're going to choose certain content modules to go on there, the ones we think tell the story best. So if it's a new work, there's not like a long history of that production. It's really more about the artist, the music. If it's a show like Giselle or Swan Lake, well, it has a long production history, so there's a story there that's interesting, and so we might include something that's more like that. And all that leads you to the Explore section, and all the stuff in the Explore section can lead you back. So that's an example of how that works. So this is the last thing I just want to talk to you guys about really quickly, which is just how important it is to look outside the arts for inspiration. New York Times, they inadvertently published an internal document about their assessment of their company. It's called Innovation Report. They did not mean for this to get out, but man, has it been great. It's like 95 pages of awesome insight. And I thought this was interesting. It's almost like seriously, guys, I'm not just making this up. I didn't just find this one report, from this Texas university. These guys are saying exactly the same thing. There's endless upheaval in technology, reader habits, the entire business model has changed. And so they're looking for ways to innovate. Personalization is a big one. And I think Amazon is like the clearest case of that. But the thing about Amazon is it's like a whole page that's just like customized to you. And honestly, I think for most of us, that doesn't seem like a reasonable thing to try and create. What I thought was interesting is they suggested another option, which is, serve everyone the same dinner, but at least give them their favorite dessert. In other words, find little moments to personalize it instead of personalizing the whole thing. So this is a great example. Of course, now this is an internal document, so they haven't done this stuff for the most part. They were talking about how they should do it. So this is an example from the Washington Post. If you come to this article, you'll see these suggested pieces at the end. But if you come to that article from Twitter, you'll get that little section. And what they've done is they're looking constantly at people who come from Twitter. They're looking at what they've been reading the most, and they compile a sort of best of for people who come from Twitter. They don't call it that, but they're feeding it to those people to try and get them to read more. So that's the dessert. It's a nice little piece of personalization. And what I think is interesting about that is they don't need them to log in to take action on that. And a couple other things just to consider is you could personalize against new visitors versus returning visitors, or based on people's geographic location. These are all things that your website knows about a person without them doing anything but showing up on your site. And so therefore, they're things you can take action against and personalize against. The other thing is now there are companies like Canopy Labs. And what Canopy Labs does is they connect your Tessitura users with your web users, and they have a number of different ways to do this, but basically they establish through a cookie who you are, and then anytime you come back, whether you log in or not, they know you're there. And so there's another way to personalize that doesn't require a login that these guys do, which I think is some interesting opportunities for personalization. Collections and repackaging. This is basically just saying, hey, if you got some content, it's great. You can let it sit there, and through SEO you can acquire more traffic, and that's good. But you could also go back through your content and start to collect it and repackage it. So this is a little morbid, but the New York Times, they didn't have this capacity on their own site, so they used Flipboard, and they just compiled notable deaths of 2015. There's all the sort of key obituaries they thought from the whole year, and then they put them on Flipboard. It ended up being the single most popular collection on the site to date. Now, obviously, it's the New York Times. I'm not saying we all should become the New York Times. I'm just saying there's opportunity here to take stuff that you have and recontextualize it and reuse it. And then here's another one I loved. On the weekend, of course, they do their weekend highlights from the week. It's just repackaging, and it's just taking into the fact that it's the weekend. So it's just a really small, easy way to recontextualize. And what I thought was interesting, I was talking to Mary Beth about our season, and we sell these packages, they're like Story Ballet Trio, and I realized, I was like, oh, that's awesome, but I bet you there's also just some people who are interested in just knowing what of our season is Story Ballets. It's a way of repackaging. It's a way of sort of providing a filter on our season for people to see what the options are and understand it through a different lens. I could then, try and sell them on that, but maybe there are these other filters that I'm not trying to sell them on. It's just a way of understanding what we're sharing. A few other things that they also share that I thought were interesting. Doing one-off content is really time-intensive. Anything that can be evergreen should be. Anytime you can create a series is good. It's just easier, right? If you can we do a series called, what's it called? We do a series that's, what is that? Instant Expert, yeah. we do a series called Instant Expert, it's a short video, and it's a series. We do one for each program, and you can watch it. It's just a little tidbit of information about historical or artistic context for that show. And so it's easy because every time we come to a show, we just know, oh, we're going to do one of those. And it's kind of like doing a trailer or doing like an audience response video. Once you sort of articulate what those series are, it just makes it much easier to create content. So I just want to leave you guys with these two things. This was from the New York Times Innovation Report. I just think it's really important to take into account. They said there's no single transformational idea in this because that implies there's an endpoint. That if you think you're going from one stable thing to another stable thing, it's not going to happen. And they go so far as to say it's probably not going to happen in our careers. This is a new state of being, and there's a lot of volatility and uncertainty. And so our ability to embrace that instead of trying to reach for stability is going to be really important. And I think the stuff that Tom was speaking to about innovation is essentially saying, how do you build an organization that is more comfortable with uncertainty and with being opportunistic? The last thing I wanted to leave with you guys was this quote from Keynes, who revolutionized macroeconomics. He published this in 1936. And I read this and I thought, oh, this is totally it. It's not in the new ideas. It's escaping from the old ones, this attachment we have. And the last thing about this I also thought was so cool was right before he published this book, he sent a letter to George Bernard Shaw saying, I wrote this book and I think it's going to be really important. And I thought, that is so cool. Why is that so cool? Because he wrote a playwright. And I have to believe that some of his ideas, this ability to look outside of like current thinking, came from the fact that he had a close relationship with an artist. I think we have so much to offer if we can just figure out the right way to share it. Thank you.